Don't be afraid of the dark. You can light it with your heart. All it takes to ignite the flame is just desire and a little faith.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate your attendance here. I'm inviting you to an exploration today. I've been researching the material I'm going to present today over the course of about the past 20 years. And what this material represents to me is not necessarily a summation or even a conclusion. It's rather an invitation. It's to put it on the table for you to bring into your own awareness so that then we can perhaps start feeding back with one another. If you resonate with the material, what we're trying to do is today is drop a pebble in a pond and allow it to ripple outward. We're going to be talking about the Illuminati. And of course, when most people think of the Illuminati, they're thinking of a secret society that wants to run the world into the ground, including you and me, enslave the masses, form a cryptocracy, a rule by secrecy, where a few people at the top of the pyramid know all and are all, and everyone else in the bottom serves that as a sort of a slave or a serf. But actually, when you look into the history of the Illuminati, the term Illuminati actually means a newly baptized Christian initiate. And this brings up a whole other take on the matter. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there are actually two forms of Christianity. There's the religion about Jesus. This is the religion of Paul. Then there's the Gnostic, Druid, or Illuminati religion of Jesus. Both of them share essentially the same core story. The story of an illumined, an enlightened being that comes from elsewhere, comes to earth, befriends the little people, preaches a message of love, heals the sick, is persecuted by the political authorities of his time, dies at their hands, is reborn, and then ascends into the heavens in a vehicle of light with a promise to return. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the story of E.T. As my friend Jordan Maxwell will tell you later, Steven Spielberg is many things, but stupid is not one of them. And of course, we all know that his movies are loaded with information, tips, triggers that will help us to bring forward this information. I'll talk about a couple of those movies later. In the religion of Paul, we have the story of a man who was trained at the Temple of Solomon. His father was a Pharisee. Jesus said the Pharisees had taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. And Paul presumably was aware of these keys of knowledge, and one day he's on his way to Damascus, which some people believe is actually the Essene compound at Qumran, when he's blinded by the light. And he attributes this light to Jesus. A couple of Jesus' assistants heal Paul, and he begins to preach a message about a figure of salvation. It's, if you simply believe in this figure, you will be saved and you will be granted eternal life. Well, what happens is that this dispenses then with all possible artifacts of this person. And of course, I show here the shroud or possibly the cloak of the Illuminati, Jesus' cloak, or what is thought to be Jesus' cloak, very controversial artifact. Paul says, you don't need to know anything about the Holy Grail. You don't need to know anything about this cloak or this shroud. You don't need to know much of anything. All you have to do is believe. Well, that goes into stark contrast with the Gnostic interpretation. Gnosis is a Greek word that means knowledge. Just as few are aware that there's actually two forms of Christianity, most who research the shroud aren't even aware that there's actually a companion stone that accompanied the shroud or cloak of Turin. It was found in Edessa, and it too was alleged to have healing abilities or a healing quality about it. It's called the Kyrmion, or Stone of Light, the stone of the Illuminati. And I believe that I found an interpretation of that stone. And here it is. Have you ever seen this face before? Where have you seen that face? You see that face on the Shroud of Turin. Shroud people say that this is the face of Jesus, and there is only one actual face that matches this. But yet, here in this depiction, we found a face that's virtually identical. In fact, I'm sure it's the same face. Interestingly, the face on the left, the one on the body of the serpent, was drawn in 1798 by a savant in Napoleon's army. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, he took over 500 savants and intellectuals with him, and they massively documented the Egyptian temples. At Alexandria, one of those savants drew an illustration or a picture of this bas-relief. Now, we all know that the first photograph of the Shroud of Turin was not made until 1898, a full 100 years after the drawing on the left was made. What that suggests to me is that the person who originally sculpted this bas-relief must have seen the man and the woman who is represented in the bas-relief. In the Gnostic tradition, Jesus is depicted as a serpent, as a wise serpent of wisdom. And we're going to answer the question why he is depicted that way as we continue. Now, I like to joke that why would you show Jesus' face on the body of a serpent? What, did Jesus and Mary Magdalene go to Alexandria to a carnival and they stuck their head in some kind of a carnival drawing and someone drew or made this bas-relief? Is that what happened here? It's inexplicable. What I'm trying to present to you, and I can barely get arrested with this story among Shroud people, they do not want to confront the fact that there is a second depiction of the face of Jesus that predates the Shroud of Turin photo, and the reason I believe is because they can't get over the fact that it's on the body of a serpent. While we're on the subject of definitions, let's talk about the definition of the word cloak. When we think of cloak, we're thinking of an outer garment called a mantle. And we think of such stories as the Samaritan woman who touched the hem of Jesus' cloak or mantle and was healed. Now that's an extraordinary power that they're assigning to this cloak. In this incredible depiction, we see Oans or John the Baptist wearing some form of a feathered garment, baptizing Jesus who stands in the River Jordan. An angel, indicated by the wings and the radiant halo around its head, is waiting with a cloak or a mantle. In my view, this is a depiction of the cloak of the Illuminati because Jesus is being presented here as a newly born Christian initiate or an Illuminati. In 2 Kings, Elijah stood on the banks of the River Jordan and took his mantle, which was called the pallium, and wrapped it together and smote the waters, and they were divided. This is of interest to us because Elijah was believed to reincarnate in the time of Jesus as John the Baptist. If that's true, and I have the word of Jesus to suggest that it is true, it suggests to me that this cloak or mantle was passed along through successive generations or passed along among reincarnating beings. In other words, Elijah had it in approximately 800 BC. He turns up again at the time of Jesus as John the Baptist and passes this cloak or mantle to Jesus. And here we have a depiction at the top of Elijah smoting the waters with his mantle or dividing the waters. And down here in the lower left, we see Elijah ascending into heavens in his whirlwind from atop Mount Moriah. This cloak or pallium is also, I believe, depicted on the body of Osiris. It's shown in a very tight-fitting mesh-like form here. This, again, is of interest to us because researchers such as Chris Knight and Bob Lomas, who wrote the Hiram Key and the Second Messiah, claim that John the Baptist and Osiris are the same guy. So if that's the case, then what we're describing here is a cloak that originated perhaps with the Egyptian savior god Osiris in primordial Egyptian times and is passed along throughout the ages. In the early 4th century, the Coptic Christians, the Egyptian Christians, depicted Jesus wearing a similar tight-fitting garment. The angels on either side of him also wear some form of a tight-fitting garment. Jesus, of course, has the radiant halo around his head, indicating he's ascended to the realm of the Illuminati. This cloak, of course, is mentioned in the Bible, and when they came to the place which is called the skull, there they crucified him. And they cast lots to divide his garments. Here is an interesting depiction of the Roman soldiers gambling for the garment or cloak of the Illuminati of Jesus. The cloak also appears in another form. It's the golden fleece sought by Jason and the Argonauts. In early Christian terms, Jesus is often shown as a beardless man who's carrying a lamb, the symbol for wisdom, on his shoulders. In my book, The Healing Sun Cone, I talk about Jesus as a man, and the Christos as a ketone frequency or vibration that is a carrier wave for sacred wisdom. And I believe that that's what these representations are pointing to as well. He's a man who has embodied this ketone frequency or vibration and is carrying this information in a cloak or on his body. The golden fleece of Jason or Jesus and the Argonauts was supposed to have been made of wool, the wool of the lamb. The word wool is the same as the word suf, which is the origin of the word Sufi, the people of the path, the people of the Tarot, because Tarot means path. The path that the Sufis represent is the path to God, the winding stairway to heaven. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today, because it's my contention that once we don the cloak of the Illuminati, we are prepared to walk or enter the stairway to heaven. Peeling the onion further on the word cloak, we find that the word cloak means to hide or to conceal. And this goes along with what I'm saying, because much of the information I've described thus far has been occulted or cloaked from the masses. The masses of the Christians in this world are the Christians of the religion of, or rather about Jesus, that religion of Paul, with very little knowledge of the true religion of Jesus. And when I speak of the religion of Jesus, it was known to his family, or his family's response to Paul's creation of this religion was, hey, look, this is a mortal guy. He's our brother, he's our son. This is a person who spent many years of his life going throughout Egypt, through Samaria, through Iran, on into India, absorbing and assimilating the sacred teachings of the ancients, and brought them together in a new religion of light. And perhaps the Shroud of Turin, if it is truly a relic of the crucifixion, represents the transformation of this person into a being of light and his ascension into heaven through that linen cloak. In geology, we find yet another interpretation of the word cloak or mantle. That's the covering of the bedrock of the earth. In anatomy, where I like to take everything, in other words, I feel that if we can't take a biblical story or myth and scripture from out here and put it inside our body, it's not going to do as much good. We find that the mantle is the cortex. It's the thin layer of the cerebrum. And of course, the Illuminati are almost always shown wearing some form of a cloak or a robe with the radiant halo. This depiction happens to come from Australia. It was discovered in 1836 and is of ancient pedigree. Jesus and his disciples were shown almost exactly the same way. So when John the Baptist initiates Jesus in the River Jordan and gives him the cloak of the Illuminati, he is given a garment or a mantle, a cloak. He's given something in the mantle of the soil. He's taught to secrete or secret something from the mantle or cortex of the brain. And this, or a combination of these things, produces illumination or enlightenment. Let's think about this in terms of the Samaritan woman. She walks up to Jesus, touches the hem of his cloak, and is healed. Well, let's say that instead of touching a robe, she actually touches the top of his radiant or glowing head. He's emitting a ketone frequency or vibration of life. And when she touches his body, she's healed. There's a transference of energy that occurs. Or let us suppose that instead Jesus is the teacher I propose he was, and he teaches her how to imbibe a substance called Christos, perhaps a mushroom, perhaps a ketone frequency or vibration, and he teaches her how to secrete a substance from within the cortex of her brain that enables her to heal her own self. That makes a lot more sense to me. One of the people that was a benefactor of these teachings was Jesus' wife, his chief apostle, his financier, and his best friend, whose name was Mary Magdalene. The cortex of the brain theory that I have is reinforced by the continual representations of her in Christian artwork holding a skull. Now you get great researchers that have done written volumes of works that say that this skull is an actual cranium, and it once belonged to John the Baptist, who was beheaded, or it possibly even belonged to Jesus himself. And you can follow the trail of this skull all the way to Scotland, to Rosalind Chapel and elsewhere. And it's quite possible that these researchers are correct, that this is an actual skull or cranium of a once living human being. But in my view, I think it's representative of something, and we'll shortly explore what that is. Mary Magdalene was a maker of perfumes. She knew all about oils, and again, the oil of the Christians was called Christos, which means good or health bestowing. Again, suggesting this idea that perhaps the ultimate secret that she was given was not actually that of a substance that was imbibed, but rather something that might have even been sniffed. Mary Magdalene, according to Lawrence Gardner, was of the order of Dan. In the Old Testament, they're called the Daniel. Daniel in the Old Testament is not a single man, it's a group of people. And the Daniel are called the skilled ones. When we break down the word Dan, we begin with the first element, D, which means door. In numerous traditions is symbolized by the delta, or pyramid symbol. An means light, or heaven. When we put that together, the order of Dan could be the order of the light door of or to heaven, taking us or returning us once again to the Sufi path, the path of the Illuminati. The word Dan also encodes the words Oans, which was, of course, the name of the Babylonian teacher, but is also the origin of the word John. John the Baptist is technically Oans the Baptist. In the Sumerian tradition, Oans is called Ea. It is known in the Gnostic Christian tradition as the Great Light. Oans, as with Ea, was always depicted, or almost always depicted, as wearing an amphibious costume, a cloak. And here he is here, and he's holding his pail and his pine cone. Here is Oans swimming in the waters of Nun, the fish, the primordial waters of the Egyptians. He's a mermaid. The word mer means love. So the mermaid symbolizes not a person necessarily who's actually amphibious, but a person who comes from the kingdom of love, which the Gnostic Cathars of southern France call the region of amour, meaning love. Some wonderful depictions here of Ea or Oans, with fish surrounding him while the sun god Shamash comes through the gateway. A line drawing of the same scenario. I'm calling your attention here to Ea with the fish around him, but also I'm calling your attention to the hair that you see at his feet. And what we have here in this single representation are two key symbols of the Christian myth. The hare, or bunny rabbit, the symbol of Easter, and also the fish, later adopted as a symbol for Jesus. I'm interested in the hare from such stories as Alice in Wonderland, the hare that leads us into the rabbit hole, the interdimensional gateway or doorway that leads to the realm of amour or the realm of light. And this, I feel, is what Ea's mission was on earth. Here are some priests of Ea standing before their tree of light or life with a flying vehicle represented above them. A close-up of a pail of the Assyrian god, similar to that that's carried by Oans or Ea, and we see in the detail of this pail that it has a tree of life etched upon it. Another fascinating depiction of a priest of Ea with the tree of light or life, with the flying vehicle above it, this time with multiple gods inside of it. Of course, we're tempted to view this as some form of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and it may well be that. Continuing depictions of the same figures, or beings that are aligned in mythology with the same figures. According to Zechariah Sitchin in his book, The 12th Planet, Ea came to Earth in search of the blue stones that cause ill. He interprets these as radioactive elements such as cobalt. However, the word ilm actually means light, and it's phonetically the same as the word El, which means shining ones, an Old Testament word used for the ancient gods. So it's quite possible that what he's actually in search of when he comes to Earth are the blue stones that transforms one into light, that transforms one into an Illuminati. Of course, Sitchin also suggests that Ea's mission on Earth involved gold. He was here to mine gold from the waters of Earth in order to repair the decaying atmosphere of his homeworld. And that may certainly be true, but as I continued to look in this story and more fully understanding the mythology of Ea, I learned that he's actually Earth's first smith or alchemist. That said, I have to ask the question why he would come to Earth to mine a substance that he scientifically could have created on his own. In other words, he had the ability, I believe, to transmute base metals into gold. According to Sitchin's research, Ea was not successful in mining enough gold from the waters of Earth. He needed to mine the gold in the southern regions of Africa where the gold was plentiful. And he actually created humanity as a slave race in order to mine that gold. For in addition to being an alchemist, he was also a bioengineer, a geneticist. And here he is wrapped in the entwined serpents, or rather cloaked in the entwined serpents of DNA. Ea was also depicted as half man and half serpent, actually as a bearded man whose bottom half of his body was serpentine, exactly as we saw in the figure on the stone of light, or the Keramean. And he is shown here initiating a priest in the secrets of the stars, the secrets of light, in my view. He is the serpent in the tree of life, and Ea's tree of life, of course, is DNA. It's interesting to me that when we look up the word gold on the internet, when I type in gold on the Google search engine, one of the first things that come up is that gold is an acronym for the Genome's Online Database, a World Wide Web resource for comprehensive access to information regarding genome research projects. Kind of a fascinating synchronicity in my view, especially in light of the ancient purpose of Ea in coming to Earth to mine gold and then ultimately altering human DNA to create a slave race. Mr. Sitchin tells us that Ea was assisted in his experiments by his companion, the goddess Ninharzak, who is also called Mary or Mari. She's depicted here with her caduceus wand in hand. And actually in 1934, archaeologists in Syria found a full-life representation of the goddess Mary. This is Walter Andre and his team of archaeologists who just pulled this incredible statue out of the earth. Here they are in their genetics lab called the Bit Shinti, the house where the wind or coil of life is breathed in. The coils of life behind them here again, once again. And in this incredible interpretation, we see what appears to be a man emerging from a pillar of light or life, with Ea toasting him. As my research continued, I started to have a little bit of trouble with the whole slave race theory of humanity being created to mine gold. And I began to look for another purpose for why, if this extraterrestrial being had come to Earth, why he would create the human race. We know that he was prompted to come to Earth after a terrible celestial cataclysm. A former planet in our solar system called Tiamat had been destroyed. One half of the planet became the asteroid belt, orbiting the sun between Mars and Jupiter. The other half of the planet became Earth. And as Sitchin says, Earth is Tiamat, the mother goddess planet reincarnated. So as I continued to look at the story, I began to wonder, is it possible that Tiamat was a planet that had life on it? Perhaps even a life approaching human life? And the answer seems to be yes. And if that's the case, is it possible that before this planet exploded, that not all of the souls on the planet were able to exit the planet before its destruction? We think here of the planet as almost like a Titanic that sunk into the waters of the night. There assuredly were survivors, but there were others that didn't make it off the ship. And I began to wonder if it's possible that Ea created the human vehicle not as a vehicle to mine gold, but rather if he was here to mine souls. And the basis for this speculation is the alchemical wordplay between gold and soul. The alchemists, we know, were certainly capable and interested in transmuting lead into gold, but primarily they were interested in transmuting their lesser soul or impure soul into a pure soul. That said, this human vehicle is taken out of the context of being a slave vehicle or a slave race, and now this body becomes actually a resurrection machine, a device that was created in order to lift the souls of this wounded planet out of the earth in order for the soul to return home. Well, as I continue on, I find evidence that this may actually be so. Ea had constructed a research facility called Eridu. Eridu means the place whose pure light reaches heaven. And in this depiction here from one of Sitchin's books, it's shown, and it's an incredible facility. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and when I look at this facility here, I can't help but recognize this as something similar to the massive GM building in downtown Detroit. And I have to ask the question, is this the research facility of a lonely extraterrestrial bioengineer, or is this the corporate headquarters for an intergalactic mining company? And if it's the headquarters for an intergalactic mining company, is gold the primary product or resource this civilization is after? Or is it something else? Is it, in fact, souls? The word Eridu comes from Eridanu, which means the river of heaven. It's reduced to Eridan and also Jordan. Eridanu refers to the river of heaven, which is, of course, our Milky Way galaxy. The very center of our Milky Way galaxy is called Tula, which is a Sanskrit word that means balance. On the left is a depiction of our Milky Way galaxy, and on the right is the alchemical symbol for Holy Spirit. In my view, the alchemical symbol for Holy Spirit is a perfect match for the shape of our Milky Way galaxy, and I wonder how it's possible that this happens. Unless the people that introduced this symbol system, the original Earth's first smiths or alchemists, knew of the relationship between alchemy and the center of our Milky Way galaxy. It also brings up another speculation. When John the Baptist is baptizing Jesus in the River Jordan, are we actually seeing a priest of Olans? Again, the word name John comes from Olans. Are we seeing Ea or Olans initiating the first human in the River Jordan, which is actually the Milky Way galaxy, transforming this first human into an Illuminati? If so, it brings a higher spiritual purpose, I believe, to the activity of the first beings that came to Earth and created humanity, of course called the Anunnaki. I believe that this is an attunement. It is some form of an initiation that's passed along through the centuries. Again, first brought here by Ea and communicated through time. This here is the King Saul, who is initiating King David. We see beneath David's feet a pillar of light or a pillar of fire. And above him we see the Tula symbol, the symbol for balance, or the symbol for the Holy Spirit. Interestingly, Ea and Osiris are quite similar figures. Osiris, again, is the same as John the Baptist in some people's view. And Osiris is always shown as a green-faced gardener. This is the same way that Ea is portrayed, not as green-faced, but rather as a gardener. And here is Osiris again in his tight-fitting cloak. Jesus in his tight-fitting cloak. My proposal is that each of these figures, Ea, John the Baptist, Jesus, Osiris, represent a continuous transmission of knowledge about the center of our Milky Way galaxy and what goes on there. Tula is a Sanskrit word, as I said, that means balance. In the Nordic tradition, they call it Thule or Thule. It's also called Atlantis. Another name for Tula is Iztala or Iztara, which means the white island. In the Nordic or Aryan tradition, they tell us that the white-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde-haired race came from Atlantis, or Thule, the white island. And we're asked to consider that Atlantis is a place on Earth. But from this accumulation of myth and wordplay, it's quite possible that the Atlantis we're looking for is not on Earth, it's in the stars. And this isn't to say that there was an earthly Atlantean civilization, it's rather to point us to another location where these beings actually, the White Island, at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. According to the Mayans, at least the research of John Major Jenkins, we're in for quite a ride here between 2012 and 2225. During this time, Earth and our solar system will be in direct alignment with the center of our Milky Way galaxy. In other words, it will be in alignment with Tula once again. All kinds of wordplays come into the appreciation of what may occur during this alignment. Tula, again, is a Sanskrit word that means balance. But what's interesting is that the letters L and the letters R are linguistically interchangeable. So what happens is the word Tula becomes Tura, which means shining place. John the Baptist happened to have come from a place called Tura Mati, shining stone. Tura phonetically is the same as Tara, spelled T-A-R-A, which is the Buddhist goddess of compassion. Phonetically, Tara is the same as terror. Tula is called the place of terror. And I find it incredible that at this time, when Earth is aligning with the central spiritual sun, Tula, that terror happens to reign on our planet. And the question is, how does this synchronicity occur? Is it engineered? In other words, is there a deliberate plan by some secret society to terrorize the planet Earth at the same time that we're aligning with the center of our Milky Way galaxy, a place that's thought to be a place of love and compassion? If so, why would some group of beings or a society of people wish to keep us from accessing the energy that is believed to be emitted from the center of the galaxy? As our solar system aligns with the center of the galaxy, it's fascinating to bear in mind that Isaiah refers to an exotic light 7 times brighter than the light of the sun that will illuminate the world when the Christos returns. This may be the true light or vibration, the ketone frequency or vibration, which once it comes into our world will enlighten every man. In my opinion, that's why our world is being terrorized at the present time. If there is indeed a secret society behind world events, as some people believe there is, it would make sense that you would not want an enlightened civilization to arise. As in the story of Jesus, the people are uncontrollable and they don't pay taxes. And they have no use for a priest or a president. So what do? We have a civilization that is being just fed the terror vibe. At the same time, we should be accessing the love or compassion vibe. We're all sort of like this figure here in this tarot card, the Nine of Swords, who's sitting in his cave, focusing on the 9 swords above his head. Now those look like swords, but those are actually words, because when you take the letter S off the word sword, you're left with words. The words that are above his head are usually worry, fear, stress, anxiety, and doubt related. How many times do you turn on the radio and you hear the announcer say, there may be a spectacular terrorist attack on the way? Or we think that something may be going to happen soon in the Middle East. It's all about keeping us in terror. Well, right beside us all along is our Ankh, or key of life. And the object of this whole process is to learn to claim that power that's beside us all along. Now, some of you have pens in your hand. I'd like you to go ahead and put your pens down on your tablets or your pads. The question that arises for each of us at this time is do we believe we can take our energy and emotion off of the worry, fear, stress, anxiety, and doubt of our times? And do we believe we can pick up our power? And the question is, do you believe that you can do that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Do you believe you can pick up the pen or other object in front of you?
Sure.
You sure?
Yep, I'm sure.
Every one of you are positive.
Possible.
I don't see any evidence that any of you really believe that you can do that.
I don't need to prove it to you. I'm just kidding.
There's a light pen in front of me. When someone asks me if I believe I can pick up that pen.
So do you believe you can pick up that pen?
Yes. Now, what's the difference between what I just did and what the majority in the room just did?
You picked it up.
I picked up the pen.
Right.
And that's the message right there. Action is the key. Because once we pick up that pen or begin to take this action, we begin to dispel the worry, fear, stress, anxiety, and doubt in our world. It's not going to happen any other way. I'm going to take you on a brief journey here through several tarot cards that will illustrate the process that we all have to go through during these times once we begin to pick up our power. We all have a male and a female side within. Do you recognize that? When we saw the goddess Ninharzag a moment ago, she had a caduceus wand in her hand with 2 serpents. The word serpent is neshama, or excuse me, is nahash in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for soul is neshama. And in my opinion, the 2 words are interchangeable because when you see a serpent in an illustration, you can equally interpret it as a soul. So she's standing there with a rod that has 2 serpents or souls bound around it. My research reveals that we all have 2 souls within us too. One soul is portrayed as male, another soul is portrayed as female. And the object in terms of claiming our power is to recognize the male-female duality that each of us have within us that I believe was originated within the story of Ea and Ninharzag. Within a relationship, one thing that I've observed after years of reading tarot cards for people is that usually within a relationship, the male feels like his primary responsibility towards the female is to protect her. And usually the way a male side or a male will find to protect the female is to keep her alone. That way no one can hurt her. But the female side says, well, I want all the good stuff that's out there. And the male side is going to throw up all kinds of reasons why we can't claim our inner power. And these reasons are portrayed by the thunderstorms that we see in this tarot card. The object is to begin to clear away those reasons, to peel back our emotions and to clear out or cleanse and purify, if you will, energy and emotion that doesn't serve our highest purpose. We need to allow, I believe, the feminine side in our civilization and also within ourselves to claim her sword of power and to begin to assert herself. But what that brings up for our civilization is a situation similar to what Indiana Jones confronted. He was on one side of this great precipice, and all the good stuff that he wanted was on the other side. And when Indiana got here, he realized that he couldn't use his whip to get across. He couldn't use his gun. He couldn't beat somebody up or steal something. All the usual ways that he used to get what he wanted. Similarly, in our current situation, we've launched a war on terror, but no weapon, no policy is really going to get us across this chasm until we begin to dispel the worry, fear, stress, anxiety, and doubt that's actually in front of us. When Indy got here, he realized that the only way that he was going to get across this was that he had to take a first step of faith. And he took that step and he found that there was a solid but invisible bridge linking the 2 sides. And remember, when he stepped out, he felt that solid bridge and he came across to the other side and he scooped up a handful of dirt and threw it across. So that's what we're all called to do here, is to adopt the Indiana Jones mindset here. When Indy got to this place, he had something that we all need, and that is motivation. Because Indiana knew that if he got across to the other side, he could get the Holy Grail, which was the object of his father's life's quest, who was played by Sean Connery in the movie. Now, Sean Connery had been shot by the Nazis, and so Indy knew that if he got the Grail, he could save his father's life. Technically, in our current situation on Earth, we're not really in a life and death situation, but in a way we are. Because if we don't get beyond our current situation, we're not going to be able to bring all the good stuff in that mystics tell us is emanating from the galactic core. So what we've got to do is begin to lock onto what it is that we do want. And this is what's portrayed in this tarot card. This figure that's sitting in this triangle of power is the same one that was just in the cave of fear a moment ago. But now he's locked on to bringing up the healing sun. That healing sun is the same as the central sun at the center of our Milky Way galaxy, or Tula. What this is going to cause in our civilization is what may be determined as a dance. It might even be a struggle, because in this depiction we can't say for certain what's happening, if this couple is dancing or if there's a shoving match going on. It appears that this apparently stronger male force is about to push the feminine force off the cliff, and she's surely going to hurt herself. But what I feel is actually happening is that she is so strong that she is able to push back the stronger male force, enabling her to escape this present situation of danger. Past the internal struggle with the male and female doing their dance, it opens up the possibility of putting us in a place of synchronicity. What's happening in this card is this gal is walking along, she suddenly finds this cave full of money. And that's what many people are interested in an individual basis, but what those 9 golden discs in there also represent are new talents, beliefs, and abilities that are within the person that can potentially come online once they align themselves with the force of synchronicity. In other words, once they get out of the way of the internal duality and align themselves spiritually with their higher spiritual self. Sorry. What we're talking about here is, of course, the force of alchemy and finding a way to alter our personal balance within so that we can radiate the force field that the alchemists described that they could manufacture within themselves. That was the key, according to the alchemist Spokane-Ellie, to how they transmuted lead into gold, or how they transmuted their impure soul into a purer soul. Once we do that, we are fully aligned now with the central spiritual sun, the healing sun. And we're in a place of joy, prosperity, and happiness. This is the promise of what our current alignment with the central sun holds for our civilization. But I believe that the only way that we're going to be able to do it collectively is once individuals begin to apprehend the mysteries of this resurrection machine, this flower or flower of gold that Ea manufactured for us eons ago. One key to doing this is presented by these illustrations here. In sacred geometry, we go from the point of the line to the three-dimensional cube. Have you all ever seen that before? What is it?
It's a two-dimensional representation.
It's a two-dimensional representation of a cube it's cube, right? Well, actually what it is 12 lines on a piece of paper. Or 12 lines on a transparency screen that's brought to life in your imagination as a cube. One that has 3 dimensions. If this 3-dimensional cube is 12 lines on a piece of paper brought to life in your imagination, isn't there a possibility then that this laser pointer is something else too? In fact, it's a collection of metal, light, there's some print on here, all comes together and we call it a laser pointer, right? But how many of us ever took science class in school? Most. And what would the science teacher tell us that this really is? It's a collection of atoms, molecules, all comes together in our imagination and we call it a laser pointer. Actually, they tell us this doesn't exist at all, other than in your imagination and within mine. In fact, they tell us that everything out here, this podium, you and me, everything in our world is brought to life in our imagination. If that's true, then this cube tells us that we always have a choice. We have free will in terms of how we're going to view our world. Because if we look at the cube from one perspective, it looks like we're looking into it. But now we can shift our perspective, and now it looks like we're looking down into the cube, and a completely different cube appears. Can you all make it shift or jump? Okay. Let's call the bottom face of this cube fear or terror. And let's call the top face of this cube love or terra. If love and terra is our goal for our civilization, and we continue to stay down here locked in fear and terror, then guess what? We're SOL, aren't we? The object is to get over this middle zone here, the 0 point, more fully into the love zone or terra zone. We do that by choice. The Hopis say that during this time, synchronicity will increase. And as synchronicity or meaningful coincidence increases, only love can exist in our hearts as we enter the new world, because our thoughts will more and more become instantly real. And I'm sure all of you have experienced synchronicity in your life, and you may be even experiencing increased synchronicity. This cube shows me, and I believe it represents how we can collectively get out of the terror zone down here and into the terra, or love zone. Once we do that, the Hopis say that love will become the base vibration in our world. The Caduceus teaches that we always have to have that duality, the male-female duality, the polarity. And if that's the case, then it suggests to me that if love is going to become the base vibration in our world, then what must be waiting for us is a higher vibration, a finer vibration, even more pure than love. We can call this love, and this up here will become love beyond love, or hyper-love. And that, I believe, is what is coming into our galaxy now. And it's up to us to learn how to bring that energy in. Once we do, it opens us up to the energy, the potentials of the Tesseract into new dimensions of awareness. It crystallizes our thinking. It gives us a new skill. It also opens up the potential here for what the Mayans say is going to happen in the period around 2012. They say that a serpent rope will come out of the sky, and 9 god beings, similar to the 9 golden discs we saw a moment ago, will emerge from that serpent rope. Well, what I did is I took out the archaic word serpent rope, and I began interpreting such depictions in light of modern technology by inserting the word wormhole or Stargate. From that perspective, it suggests that what the Mayans are saying is that in 2012, a wormhole is going to open and 9 god beings are going to emerge and present us with an enlightenment teaching. Now, I call your attention to the source of this wormhole or serpent rope, this symbol right up top here. In my opinion, this symbol and this symbol here are the same. Has anyone ever seen that symbol before? What is it?
All-seeing eye.
The all-seeing eye. It's good. It's got 4 Vesica Pisces in it. Very good. Excellent.
Electricity.
Electricity. Yeah, very good. We've got some form of radiation going on here. We've got the center, the dot with the circle around it is the Egyptian symbol for gold. It's also the central spiritual sun with the ring of the galaxy around it. It's also the logo for a planet called Namtiliku, which means literally name or destiny of God. Ku is Tula. Namtiliku, name of God is Tula. You probably know it as Nibiru, the Lord, Marduk, or Planet X. When we return to the Mayan depiction, it says that a wormhole from Planet X is going to open in 2012, and 9 god beings are going to emerge and deliver a teaching of enlightenment. Namtiliku, also the beings that come from Namtiliku, including Ea, adopted as their logo the single serpent entwined around a rod. This is the symbol for the constellation Ophiuchus or Asclepius, the constellation nearest the galactic center. When I add all this up, it suggests to me that these beings, or perhaps their homeworld, originates from this sector of space. Ophiuchus is located in between the constellations Scorpio and Sagittarius. Both of their pointers point to Ophiuchus as a very special region of space. The logo of Ophiuchus, or Asclepius, is the symbol for healing today. You see it on emergency medical vehicles. Asclepius literally means a skill of God. We find it represented in numerous contexts. This is the pillar of Osiris, rather the hieroglyph for the pillar of Osiris, which shows a serpent or soul hanging from a pillar. This is a full representation of the Pillar of Osiris, a device that stood between 45 and 90 feet tall, and was used to house the soul of the Savior Osiris, Ea, John the Baptist, and Osiris. Because again, I'm suggesting that their mythology is telling us that they're all the same figure, or of the same mythological system. Here we see our same entwined serpents hanging from the body of Ea with his Ankh or key of life beside him. The Rosicrucians adopted almost the exact same symbolism, showing a serpent holding a key emerging from a box or ark. According to Robert Bauval, this is a depiction of Osiris. In his bark of the millions of years, he is holding the Ankh or key of life in hand, which is right beneath a star. The Egyptian word star is Saba, which means door. Osiris, Bauval says, is therefore holding a stargate opened by a key. The Gnostics called him Shnubis. They said Shnubis is Jesus. I promised Ivy I would tell the story of the snorkel monster.
Yes.
This is an appropriate time to mention this story, because as I thought back on it, I wonder why Ivy wanted me to tell this story, but as I thought back on it, I realized that that was my understanding or investigation into this appearance of the snorkel monster in Tennessee has a lot to do with the information that I'm presenting today. What happened was in 1996, a family was terrorized. A father was awakened one morning by the sound of what he thought was rain on his tin roof of his trailer park in Tennessee. I mean, how cliche can you get? He wakes up and goes outside and he sees what he calls the snorkel monster. It's a serpentine guy, he's green, and he's being fired upon by a UFO floating above a radio tower a couple of miles away. He goes and wakes up his family, and they come out and they watch this snorkel monster transform into a ball or orb of light. This goes on for 2 hours. The family dog is hit by one of these laser beams. The father is hurt through the process, and they're just completely terrorized by this whole incident. The next morning they wake up and they see that the snorkel monster, which they reported had a single bird foot that he hopped around on, had left footprints in the dirt around their trailer home. Well, they called, the father called his brother-in-law, who knew my brother-in-law. And he called him and he said, look, I'm calling you because you're the weirdest people I know. And I have to tell you that what happened to me and my family, and I hope you'll understand. Well, I remember this clearly. My sister and my brother-in-law take off and they go trying to find the snorkel monster. They have all this compassion for it and realizing that this thing was hurt by what happened the night before, and they want to give it some assistance. And they get up there and they even take photographs of its bird footprint. Well, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I just thought my sister and brother-in-law had flipped their lid or something and just kind of forgot about it. And then a couple years later, 1999, I guess it was, I was doing some research on the language of the birds, which we'll talk about later, and myth and symbols. And I was telling them about how the letter M is the symbol for the goddess, and it's also considered interchangeable with the letter Y. And none of this makes sense, I know, but that's okay. But the letter Y is representative of a single bird's foot. And I said, you know what? No one knows it, but Shnubis had a single bird's foot. It's completely hidden. The reference to it are very veiled, but this was a serpent with a bird's foot. And my brother-in-law, Donnie, said, well, that's the snorkel monster. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he retells the whole story again. Well, the bottom line here, what I'm trying to say is that I believe that this figure, the snorkel monster that this family described, is the serpent of Eden, or something similar to it. And for whatever reason, it appeared at Cross Plains, Tennessee, and was being fired upon by a UFO. That's the snorkel monster story. Perhaps the point in telling you this is that so many of our ancient myths and legends are being updated today. And here is an example of a story of the serpent of Eden appearing in a modern context. This hanging serpent, Shnubis, portrayed here in the Pillar of Osiris, also appears in Gnostic crucifixion scenes. The Pillar of Osiris, the 90-foot tall device that housed the soul of Osiris, was called Rasto, which means, Ras means wisdom, Tau means cross or pillar. In my books, I've developed the theme that the Pillar of Osiris is the same as the cross of crucifixion, which is why the two portrayals are the same. What the early Christians did is they took the word Rasto and they flipped it around and came up with a new word, Stau. In all Bibles up until the year 600, the word cross was not used. The Greek word that they used was Stau, which means pillar, which is the mirror image of Rasto. As happens in so many instances, they took one mythological system, flipped it around, and called it new. It's not new at all. It comes from ancient Egypt. And here is a full Gnostic coin. The same hanging serpents appear at Dendera, or Ten Terra, the place of compassion. Zechariah Sitchin interprets this portrayal as a genetic scene, as a medical facility, where this is a patient on the operating table and the goddess Bast here, who's holding her cutting knife, the same cutting knife that was used by Ninharzag, is about to take this serpent and implant it in this body. I took it one step further and said, this is not a serpent at all. This is not a light bulb either, which is one of the other reigning theories. This is a soul. And she is about to take this soul and cut it up and place it into this human body.
Don't be afraid of the dark. You can light it with your heart. All it takes to ignite the flame is just desire and a little faith. The secrets of the light are calling, saying there's a new day dawning. The secrets of the light are calling, with messages of hope and longing. Can't you hear them echoing? A choir of angels sing, voices are beckoning, bells are ringing. The secrets of the light, the secrets of the light, the secrets of the light, the secrets of the light. Night falls in and the song begins. Hear the violins play. Take my hand and be my man. Feel the
was the cave of Bethlehem where the Christ child was born? Right there. The Essenes are called the physicians of the soul or therapeutae. We all know that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were Essenes. They're also called Kenobi. They lived in Egypt on Lake Moria. Remember Obi-Wan Kenobi? This is another theft right out of the ancient or early Gnostic text. Kenobi actually means serpent of light, because the word Khan means serpent and OP means light. It also means serpent. So when the Essenes say that they are Kenobi, they come from the serpent of light, we have to ask, what does that mean? Does that mean that they too were disciples of Ea, the great light, who is portrayed as a serpent? Quite possibly, and in fact that's the operating premise that I have in many of my books. We know from the work of Sitchin that Ea was not happy with just creating humanity as a slave race, that he took one step further and began to create a new model of human, a being that was created more in the image of the gods, and he set about educating this figure, elevating them even to the level of the gods. I believe that the name of the civilization that we're talking about here is Atlantis. The 8 powers that Ea would have taught them are the same as the 8 she powers, the powers of the Illuminati. The ability to make oneself infinitely small in an instant, the power to grow infinitely large at will, levitation, remote viewing, reaching out and scooping up a handful of dirt off the surface of Mars, the ability to dive into solid ground and move about as if it were water, total control over the elements, and the ability to create and destroy matter. These are the abilities of the original Illuminati. These are the teachings that Ea would have initiated his higher beings in. And these are, I believe, the same teachings that John the Baptist initiated Jesus in. According to Atlantean myth, at the center of the Atlantean civilization was the Pillar of Meru, which means love. It also means center. Another term for that is Duranki, which the Sumerians said meant bond between heaven and earth. A pillar that was constructed, or actually described as an antenna, that the Anunnaki used to send the word heavenward. This is kind of curious because another term for the Egyptian pillar of Osiris was Ta-wer, spelled T-A-W-E-R, which means bond between heaven and earth. And as we can see, it plainly represents or appears to look like some form of an antenna, exactly as the Sumerians described. This antenna, as I'm going to describe, is also inside our human body. It belonged, of course, to Osiris, the green-faced god of gardening. And this is where our story kind of begins to take an interesting turn, because the Egyptian word which was used to designate the mummy was usually marked upon the coffin lid. It consisted of the consonants KRS with the suffix T, giving KRST. Now, if we add vowels to that, what do we come up with? Christ. Christ is the same as Charist, Kirist, or Christ with a K. Christ rings of the Greek Christos, flesh. The use of another vowel, we stand very close to the Latin crux, or cross, the Middle English cross, and our own word crust, or mantle. Cloak, in other words. When Osiris is depicted wearing his tight-fitting costume, I believe that he's portrayed wearing the cloak, or crust, the mantle of the Illuminati. In other words, he has a different kind of skin or flesh. The Christ on the cross is the encrusting of the divinity within flesh. Not far away also is our word crystal, which contains the root meaning of any process of incrustation. And then comes the Greek word krusios, which means golden, and points to the end of the process to be consummated by the Spirit in matter. When metaphorically speaking, all baser forms of the encrusted covering or mummy will be transmuted by the divinity's glowing fire into the purest spiritual gold. Now the soul is prepared to re-enter the crystal sea. What all this means to us is that when Ea says that he created humanity as a slave race in order to mine gold, while there are depictions of them mining gold out of the earth, I believe that the gold they're talking about is, one, our souls, but that also our human body appears to be a flower of gold. And the secret process that was implanted within our DNA is the ability to transmute our human flesh into the flesh of Christ, a golden type flesh, or the flesh of the Illuminati. Once we have ascended to this level of mastery, we're able to exemplify all of the abilities, those 8 powers that we talked about just a moment ago. But ultimately, it wouldn't be a whole lot of fun if you could manipulate matter on Earth, if you could levitate, if you could do all those kinds of things. And what fun would you have, really? The idea is that maybe there's some higher purpose that is served by transmuting the human body into a being of gold or an Illuminati. And that ultimate purpose, I believe, is for travel through the wormholes of Eden. The serpent rope, or Stargate, that the Mayans talk about as appearing after 2012. The ultimate destination is probably the center of our Milky Way galaxy, although it's possible that the actual location is any of the other billions of galaxies within the known universe. This is the true garden which the soul inhabited before it came to Earth. And here's some remarkable depictions of galaxies that have been provided by NASA. Well, according to the Sumerian story, what happened was that after Ea created this super race, his half-brother Enlil, who was violently opposed to this endeavor, sent the flood and destroyed the ancient race. And this is a kind of an interesting depiction of the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden. And what do we see but God placing a ring around the garden? I'm interpreting that ring as a symbol for a stargate or a wormhole. What happened was Ea is creating an advanced race capable of going through the wormhole. His half-brother shuts the gate, closes the wormhole, and destroys the human race as a consequence. But what happens, we find throughout history, is that there's a regrouping after the flood, beginning with Abraham, beginning with other biblical figures, all the way up to this figure here, Ashurbanipal, who claims that he could read the text from before the flood. And what this indicates is that, again, there was this regrouping after the flood, an attempt to reclaim the knowledge of the ancient gods, the gods of Sumeria, in an attempt to rebuild the gate of God. And in fact, in approximately the year 1600 AD, that gate was built at a place called Babylon. We know it as the Tower of Babel. Babel is a word that means gate. It was constructed by a biblical king whose name was Nimrod, who was considered a tyrant. Nimrod is a condensed form of the word Meru rod, Meru again being the rod at the center of Atlantis, but it's also a condensed form of Meroduk, or Marduk, which is another name for Planet X. It's also one of the names for Ea's son. It means bright one or shining one. So what we see here in the story of Nimrod is the biblical king's connection to the son of Ea in an attempt to rebuild the gate to God. Here's a portrayal of the pillar of Marduk, which has a dragon as its base and a single long pillar emerging from it. The pillar of Marduk, we had seen this depiction earlier with the priests of Ea with their pillar of light, the moon, and the flying craft above it. Here's the Meru or Marduk pillar right down here. And basically, symbolically, what we're talking about is a pillar with a serpent or dragon. And where have we seen that before? This is a depiction of the pillar of Meru or Marduk from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript. I was once in Florida lecturing on this subject, and a scientist came up to me after the presentation, and he says, hey, I was pretty much asleep through most of your talk until you put up that blueprint. And I said, what blueprint? And he went through my slides until he came to this picture right here, and he says, I design particle beaming weapons for a living. He says, do you realize that that's a particle accelerator? That's a particle beam weapon, he said. He said, look, this is the pulse emitting from the weapon right here, which is designed to rotate on that platform right there. The question is, what is that doing on a 2nd century Chinese religious manuscript? And what is its connection to the pillar of Meru, or Marduk, constructed by Nimrod in Babel? Is this a blueprint for the construction of a gate to God? The answer is yes, because Babylonian myth says that the Tower of Babel was based upon the pillar of Meru. Nimrod called himself a mighty man. In the Bible, these are called the giants, or the Nephilim. And Nimrod claimed that he had a skin that he stole that was made originally by God for Adam. Well, in our speak, that means this was a skin or a body of flesh created by Ea for his creation, who was called Adapa, because that's the source of the Hebrew story. When Nimrod put on this skin, this cloak, he became a mighty man. And actually, mighty man was not a single individual. Nimrod was a name for a whole civilization of people that inhabited Babylon, and I believe were capable of going through the gate to God. This is perhaps a depiction here of the symbolic representation of that cloak of Ea. The tight-fitting mesh suit worn by Osiris is probably another prototype for it, as is the cloak of the Illuminati given by John the Baptist to Jesus, who is another mighty man. Interestingly, one of the other myths that's being recreated today is the nanotechnology soldier suit of the U.S. military. In this year, the United States Army gave MIT $50 million to develop a new soldier suit of the future. It will be made of tiny computers that will fit the skin like a second skin. If the warrior is shot, the skin will go about repairing the skin. If he's stabbed, it'll do the same thing. If the soldier breaks his leg, it'll form a splint for him so that it can heal. They're also going to implant nanotechnology transmitters in the cells of these figures so that they can heal the soldiers remotely. They're going to implant a charge of energy in the heel so that the soldier can jump 20 feet into the air if he needs to. The suit is going to have a chameleon-like effect, so no matter what environment the soldier finds himself in, he can cloak himself in the similar pattern of that environment and therefore be almost invisible. The idea that the military wants to get across here is imagine the psychological impact of encountering one of these mighty men. Any potential foe would be absolutely, just terrified by coming across such a figure. In my opinion, the suit of the mighty man is very similar to what Nimrod had created in the ancient world. Nanotechnology, of course, is of interest to NASA and other agencies around the planet right now because of the enormous capability of this technology. We're actually able to manipulate matter at the atomic level right now. And what they talk about is a convergence of these technologies that are coming together that are forming a second skin for humanity. It's going to be composed of a convergence of nanotechnology, molecular biology or genetics, of cognitive science, and information technology. And the platform for all of this technology is a second skin. What they are doing is creating a new race of human that will be superior in every way, shape, and form to the current model of humanity. And what I feel the military's ultimate aim is to put forward this new humanity as a force of control against lowly, ordinary Homo sapiens. The four primary 21st century power tools are atoms, genes, neurons, and bits. I believe that we've come full circle in reclaiming the technology of the ancients, and we're now beginning to raise up to the level of the gods. While I was researching this, I experienced a kind of a funny synchronicity. I learned the story of Spring-Heeled Jack. I don't know if you've ever heard of Spring-Heeled Jack or not, but the story is that this figure terrorized London in the 1870s. For over 30 years, this figure would appear, and he wore a tight-fitting suit that had an oily-like quality to it. He wore a cape, and he had a W on his chest. He could spit fire. and he could emit a blue gas from his mouth. And interestingly, when people would chase him, Spring-Heeled Jack could jump 20 feet in the air. He could literally jump over a house to evade capture. So as I'm reading this story of Spring-Heeled Jack, I'm thinking, now wait a minute, I've heard a description of that very same suit. That's the nanotechnology soldier suit that the military is developing right now. And I began to wonder, is it possible that this figure had somehow gone back in time and was trapped there? Because the reports throughout England was that Spring-Heeled Jack's costume deteriorated over time. And I wonder if this guy somehow got trapped back in that period of England. Well, the synchronicity was this, that on his last appearance in England in 1900, he led a group of people to a field behind a house where he was wearing a white cloak, and he jumped over the house and disappeared. The name of the street he last appeared on was William Henry Street. Yeah. And I'm reading this thinking, well, wait a minute, there's a message here somewhere in this, and I'm not sure where it is. You know, it's like someone's kind of leading me along here to this, and I'm thinking this is some kind of a traveler. When I talked with Whitley Strieber about this, he says, well, maybe you are Spring-Heeled Jack, and you're the one trapped back in time. So now I'm thinking, well, do I go forward with this quest to understand this, or just kind of leave it alone? I think ultimately where all this is headed, you know, if we have the ability, if our new power tools are bits, genes, neurons, and nanotechnology, then right now we're on the verge of opening wormholes. Scientists in Britain say they can open up a wormhole large enough to insert a cork through it. It won't be very long before we're opening up a wormhole large enough to send a human through. As soon as we become a wormhole traveling civilization, we return to the realm of love from whence we came. And I believe that by looking back to the myths of the Anunnaki, particularly of Ea and his companion Ninharzag or Mary, that we will find a tremendous amount of knowledge about how to transform the human being, not in a military sense, but in a spiritual sense, to create a new being based on spiritual principles rather than militaristic principles. Meru, as I said, is the same word as Mary, which means love. And in the Sumerian depictions of her, or the Syrian depictions of her, she is shown in this full-life depiction here wearing her coat, her hat, and her other garments. Zecharia Sitchin writes about this get-up in his book, The 12th Planet. He says that her garment is called the miracle garment, the pala garment or miracle garment. And remember, the word Christ rings of Chris, Greek for flesh. And that's what pala means as well. It's a Sanskrit word that means flesh. When Mary put on her miracle garment, she went into her sheepfold, which to me is similar to the same place that Gilgamesh went when he was looking for the gods. And here is Gilgamesh entering some form of a gateway leading to who knows where. Mary put on her coat, her hat, and her other garments, and also interacted with her pillar of Meru, the world pillar which she reclaimed after the biblical flood and erected at her, she has poor choice of words, she constructed at her temple medical facility in Syria. So she puts on her coat, her hat, and her other garments to interact with this pillar because her husband lives, who is a serpent, lives within that pillar. I think what we're talking about here is Ninharzag or Mary going into a pillar or using this pillar to open up a gateway to interact with her husband, Ea. And this pillar is the same one that we've been describing throughout the day. This is a close-up of Mary's helmet here. Zecharia Sitchin says that helmet is called the Shigura helmet. Literally translated, he says Shigura means that which makes go far into the universe. And the question is, what kind of a helmet do you put on, or what kind of a garment do you put on that makes you go far into the universe? I find an interesting synchronicity or wordplay in the word Shigura and Shigura A or Shigura A star. This happens to be the name of a radio source located directly adjacent to the black hole located at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. So when Mary puts on her Shigura helmet and goes far into the universe, my take is that she's opening up a wormhole and going through the black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. A black hole or a wormhole located at that place. located at Thule or Tula. Interestingly, the alchemists knew all about this Thule or Tula business. They depicted the emanations coming from the central sun or Tula by a cluster of grapes or blue stones. It turns out Mary has those same blue stones at her neck. I believe the blue stones, or the blue apples, are the same blue stones that Ea came to earth in search of. And these blue stones or blue apples appear in some very key biblical scenes. Now remember, we're regrouping after the flood. Our new date line is 1400 BC. Joshua, or Jesus, because the name Joshua and Jesus are interchangeable, goes to a place called Eshcol, which means Valley of the Cluster, as in grapes or blue apples. He goes there at the request of Moses, who has sent out spies to search out the Promised Land. When Joshua gets to Eshcol, he steals a cluster of grapes from the sons of Anak, or Anunnaki, who dwell there. He gets back to Moses and reports that, Moses, we're not going anywhere near Eshcol. And the reason is because the Anunnaki live there. And they're described as giants, at the sight of which the humans appeared as grasshoppers. But that's not the real reason that Joshua, and here's he and his companions stealing the grapes and returning them to Moses. The real reason that Joshua, or Jesus, is terrified of the Anunnaki is because the land there eateth the people up. Now, when you go to your Bible concordance, it says that Joshua, the mighty warrior, the mighty man, in fact, of the Hebrew or Israelite nation, was terrified because he saw a cave. Well, if he saw a cave, why use the obscure language? Why not just say Joshua saw a cave and he said, Moses, you can't go there because there's a cave there? Another interpretation is that they saw a plague there, and therefore they had to stay out of that region. Well, that doesn't make any sense either, because Moses and the Israelites had just escaped Egypt, and conveniently Yahweh had sent a plague to help them escape. So they certainly knew what a plague was. Others say that, well, the soil didn't provide enough food for them. So it didn't provide for them, so it's the land that eateth the people up. This is directly contradicted because we're in the land of Canaan, which is the land of milk and honey. So I feel that when Joshua reports to Moses that they can't go near Eshcol, where the Anunnaki are, because the land there eateth the people up, that he's describing something supernatural. I believe he's describing a Stargate or a wormhole. He sees people walking along the surface of the earth and they suddenly vanish, as if being transported by a Star Trek transporter beam or walking into a Stargate, similar to what you saw in the movie Contact or Stargate. The sons of Anak, the Anunnaki, were operating that Stargate at Eshcol, the Valley of the Cluster. Eshcol is an interesting word because it's phonetically a skull. Well, that's where Jesus was crucified. Skull is the same as the word a skill, as in Asclepius, a good skill or a God skill. The ultimate God skill, I feel, is the opening of stargates or wormholes. What happens, I feel, and this is completely, it's not even in the Bible, but I'm just operating on pure supposition here. Joshua and his companion bring these blue apples, the cluster of grapes, which is probably the exotic matter of which the wormholes are constructed. I think they probably put it in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, after another 400 years or so, was stashed in the first Temple of Solomon, constructed atop Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. That was an intended wordplay because Moriah in Jerusalem, which Sitchin says is a communication center of the Anunnaki, is the same word as Meru. He says the Anunnaki had constructed a pillar that reached into the heavens at Moriah. Meru is an antenna that reaches into the heavens. It's the same technology. 576 BC, here comes King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, I'm the reincarnated Nimrod, everybody. You know what we're going to do? We're going to rebuild the Tower of Babel. Well, he needs a little bit of help. He goes and he levels the Temple of Solomon and brings the Daniel and the other temple wise men back to Babylon. And he's recreated this as an incredibly glorious ancient city, rebuilding the Temple of Marduk. There's even a temple for Ninhars out there. The Temple of Solomon is an extraordinary place. According to the Bible, God beamed his wisdom directly to Solomon. His name, by the way, means peace. And in the ancient text, the ancient context, peace actually means not the absence of conflict between warring factions or petty religions, but rather peace means the unity of heaven and earth. The Quran says that actually Solomon didn't get his wisdom directly from God. Rather, he learned his wisdom by understanding the language of the birds, which was taught to him by the hoopoe bird. The word hoopoe is the same as Hopi, which means peace. Opi is, of course, the root for optic and optimum. The language of the birds is the language of the alchemists, according to Fulcanelli. If you understand the language of the birds, says Fulcanelli, you have the ability to transmute the elements. It's a phonetic punning language that was used, originally taught by Ea, according to Christian O'Brien. It is the language of heaven, brought to earth and taught to first humanity in the Garden of Eden by Ea. The language of the birds is actually the language of the bards. And a bard is a poet. Of course, Solomon was a poet, so was David. I'm often asked, how do you account for some of the discrepancies between science and some of the conclusions of Zecharia Sitchin's work? And I remind people that what we're talking about here is not always science. What we're talking about is poetry. These ancient texts are poetry. So it can mean just about anything that you want, really. The language of the birds is the language of the bards or poets. And another phonetic interpretation of bard is bud. What's a bud but a flower? A bud is something that the Kenobi might have been familiar with. Their name Kenobi means serpent of light, but it's also a reference to cannabis. They were pot smokers, yeah, no doubt about it. So the language of the bards and the buds is the same. The serpent in the grass, the Holy Spirit in the grass is, well, you figure it out. The buds. Who are the buds? Well, bud means awakened one. Bud is, of course, the root for Buddha or Buddha. What we're talking about here is the language of the birds, the bards, the buds, or the Buddhas, the wise ones, the skilled ones. And once we apprehend this language, we have the eye of the Illuminati, the ability to see, to feel, and otherwise experience these mysteries. The Latin avi means bird, and it also means angel. So once again, we are talking about the language of the angels. This is King Solomon right here. I'm going to get back to Nebuchadnezzar in a moment in case anybody is wondering. This is King Solomon here. He's got his sword in his hand, and this is his queen, whose name is Saba, right here. Again, her name means door. And it was her father that taught Solomon the language of alchemy and the language of the birds. Solomon has this is a 4th century depiction of Solomon here. He's got this kind of, again, strange robe on, and I call your attention to the knotwork around his helmet. It appears to connect to something attached to his back right here, and I just think it's kind of a fascinating depiction of a way to present King Solomon. In the previous illustration, the Queen of Saba was holding a canopy. And the canopy that I think she's holding is the canopy that Plato described that surrounds the earth. Plato said that if you could see earth from afar, it would appear as a 12-angled pyramid. This 12-angled pyramid had a protective force. It was like a canopy. And there were 12 holes, or holes in 12 wells, or holes in space that surrounded the earth. Mary apparently knew all about those wells or holes in space because when she put on her coat, her hat, and her other garments, she opened a hole in space, I believe, and traveled through it. Nebuchadnezzar comes along and begins to reclaim this technology. He again has looted and leveled the Temple of Solomon and brought the wise men back to Babylon. It's worth noting that his name comes from Nabu, which means wise man. There was a beautiful temple built for Nabu. He had a massive library in a place called Borsippa. Archaeologists have found that temple in which is in present-day Iraq. His library is gone. It's missing. It's interesting to us because Nabu, according to the Mandans, is not only Buddha, who is depicted as half man and half serpent. Nabu is also considered to be a reincarnation of Thoth, the Egyptian magician who is half man and half serpent. The the Mayan savior, Quetzalcoatl, who was the king of Tula, who is portrayed as half man and half serpent. But ultimately, the Mandan the Mandan followers of John the Baptist said Nabu is, Jesus. His library is somewhere in Iraq today, missing. People desperately searching for this library, and just imagine if this library was found. So Nebuchadnezzar sets about rebuilding the gate to God. And apparently he had some great success in this endeavor. In Babylon, he had constructed a 90-foot tall golden image of the beast, the pillar of Marduk, pillar of Meru, Osiris's pillar that the Egyptians said could drill holes in space and house the soul of the Savior. He had this device, but he couldn't quite make it work. But he knew that the three wise men from the Temple of Solomon could. So he made a bet with them that if they could open up what he described as the fiery furnace, that he would convert to their religion. Well, what happens is the three wise men are asked to put on their coat, their hat, and their other garments, as the Bible says, and enter this fiery furnace. The coat, the hat, and the other garments they put on, I believe, are the same as the getup worn by Mary when she went far into the universe. And actually what happened, according to the book of Daniel, is the three wise men, 1, 2, 3, go into this fiery furnace, and they come out. Nebuchadnezzar and his men are all assembled, and they're astonished to see that not only are these three wise men in pristine condition, they're not alone. The Son of God is with them. As in Nabu, Jesus, Buddha, Quetzalcoatl, Osiris, Ea, take your pick. Any and all of the above. I interpret this as a Stargate or wormhole event. Nebuchadnezzar had reclaimed the technology that Nimrod once had. He opened up a gate to God, and they came back with the Son of God in tow. These three wise men are, of course, the same as the three magi that went looking for the Christ child in the Bible story. Nebuchadnezzar is reincarnated on the planet today. And here he is. Saddam Hussein claims, and has for a long time, he is the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar, which means he's also Nimrod. He spent over $500 million in the 1980s rebuilding Babylon, just as Nimrod had done and as Nebuchadnezzar had done. We, of course, destroyed it. And he's still at it. Just this past year, he had his archaeologists contact the British Museum and say, hey, listen, you guys have copies of 10,000 of our ancient Sumerian tablets. We want copies of those. We want them now. Then he calls the Berlin Museum and says, hey, you guys stole the Ishtar Gate from us, the one that was in Babylon, remember, that Nebuchadnezzar had built, you guys stole in the 1800s? We want that back, and we want that back now. He's looking for the library of Nabu. There's over 10,000 unexcavated archaeological sites in Iraq. The secrets of the Anunnaki are buried 20 feet beneath the sands of Baghdad. And this man controls those secrets. And we're over there for oil? Are you joking? That's who this figure is. Now, let's just think about this for a second. You know, my take on this is, I have two takes on this. One, Saddam he was claimed by the CIA in the early 60s. Once you're in the agency, you're always in the agency, so they say. This is the exact same time that the people behind the scenes, or whoever it was that was creating all those doubles of Lee Harvey Oswald. Remember the theory that there was doubles of Oswald. They had him going into Cuba at the same time he's going into the Russian embassy in Moscow, and all this funny business. Well, just this past year, the German television agency went back as far back as like 1998, looked at over 600 video images of Saddam, and came to the conclusion that none of them were him. He's got at least 3 doubles. And so I began to wonder, is this guy just some kind of a puppet that the CIA has cooked up ever since the 60s? They know that in order for the Christians to return, that Babylon has to be destroyed just like Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, by a premeditated fireball from the sky. You know, so are they creating this drama, this war on terror, to fulfill some kind of insane biblical prophecy? Or is he really the reincarnated biblical King Nebuchadnezzar? And if so, think about that, what that means for you and I. What this guy is going to have to do is what Nimrod did and what Nebuchadnezzar did. Assure that 2,000 years from now, some idiot like me is going to be standing up and saying, well, this guy is the reincarnated Saddam Hussein, and he was the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar, who is Nimrod. That's what this guy is up to, assuring his place in ultimate human history. I believe that probably buried beneath the sands of Iraq are the secrets of Ea, which ultimately revolve around Stargate and wormhole technology. And in every way, shape, and form, Saddam believes he has got to outdo what Nebuchadnezzar had done, which means he's got to rebuild the ancient libraries. The Saddam Hussein School of Cuneiform Studies is open for business. This is kind of like the Adolf Hitler School of Runology. You know, it's like, come and join my quest, my exploration into the Stargate and wormhole technology of the Anunnaki. Except this guy can really dig beneath the sands there.
What the Pope really means,
I don't know.
He has a garment, doesn't he?
Well, the question is, does Saddam Hussein have the garment? No, we do. We have the garment. He's probably just foaming at the mouth. I think, you know, ultimately it's going to take some kind of a cooperation between the two sides in order to make anything really happen. We remember that in the Sumerian stories of Ea and Enlil, you have Ea that wants to uplift humanity even to the level of the gods. Let's educate humanity, bring them up, lift them up, and bring them out. Whereas he's opposed by his half-brother Enlil, who seeks to keep humanity at the level of slaves and sex objects. Which side Saddam Hussein actually falls on, I can't say for sure. Is he a son of Ea or is he a son of Enlil? It's hard to say. But what we can see is that the dynamic that was set up so long ago in ancient Samaria is still being played out today, even within our current government in the United States. Is our government bent on creating a superhuman that will excel and even possibly reach the level of the gods from a spiritual sense? Or are we over here creating a being that will serve the military? I think what we're going to have to do is just see how this whole scenario plays out right here. But the point of this whole discussion here is that current world events are recreations of what's happened in the ancient world. You and I are the participants in this event. You and I can impact how this event actually unfolds. As we begin to create this new race of mighty men, you and I are the elders of the new human race that's going to be created. Which means we have to begin through our voting, through our own activism, say, look, do we really want to go to Circuit City in about 20 years and get implants that we can put inside our brain that will contain all the world's knowledge? Do I really want to go to the doctor and have that device implanted within me that will assure that I'll live for another 50 years? Do I really want to go through gene therapy? Is this the kind of thing that we really want to have happen? Because the answer is, has to be, that we're doing it right now and we're fulfilling the dream of tyrants such as Nimrod and especially Adolf Hitler, who knew that believed that he was the Messiah of a new Aryan race that would see the creation of a new super race of humans. Well, we're doing it, and you and I are responsible for the creation of this new human. Well, Nebuchadnezzar lives in 576 BC. Well, what happens is just to finish the story of Nebuchadnezzar, they open that gate and the Son of God comes back down. Next thing Nebuchadnezzar finds out is the Watcher and the Holy One of Israel hightail it into Nebuchadnezzar's dream and say, look, pal, you're dead for what you just did. How dare you do that? The Watcher and the Holy One. Well, interesting thing is that on the first day of his inauguration, George Bush stands before the world, and twice he says, "The angel in the whirlwind directs this storm. The angel in the whirlwind directs this storm." And everyone's sitting there going, what the hell are you talking about? Even Peggy Noonan, who wrote speeches for Reagan, didn't know what he was talking about. Well, the angel in the whirlwind is the watcher. The whirlwind is the UFO that we've been seeing here. The angel in the whirlwind is the watcher. And effectively, what Bush is saying is that America is being directed by the watcher and the Holy One, who is Yahweh. And what is George Bush saying to Saddam Hussein? You're dead. Just exactly as happened in the ancient world. It's the same story being repeated once again in modern times. So that was the demise of Nebuchadnezzar. His death was foretold by the Watchers, by the Nephilim, by the Anunnaki. They offed him for opening up that gate to God. Henceforth, after that, the word Babel no longer meant gate. It meant confusion. Enough said. Approximately 600 years later, something kind of strange happens. Joshua reappears, and his name now is Jesus. And according to the mystery schools, the cluster of grapes that Joshua and his companions stole now appear at the crucifixion. What this Gnostic portrayal from Sion, Switzerland is saying is this: the two thieves that are seldom identified in Bible stories are the same two thieves, Joshua and his companion, who stole the secrets of the Stargates from the Anunnaki. The secrets of the Stargates, or wormholes, appeared at the crucifixion, according to this scene. The blue apples, again, are the symbol for the center of our Milky Way galaxy, or Tula. Jesus is the son of Mary, who is Mari, or Mary. In every way, shape, and form, the early Christians simply stole the story from the ancient Sumerians. And when they came to the place which is called the skull, there they crucified him. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And once again, here's our thieves and the Roman soldiers playing dice for his garments. Now what happens is Jesus tells his disciples, he says, hey, I'm going to spend 3 days in the belly of the whale, just like Jonah or Elans did. And the disciples, though they're Essenes or Kenobi and they're probably smoking grass, still didn't know what he was talking about. The word whale and well are the phonetically the same word. That was one advantage that I had when I moved from Detroit to Nashville, because people, they stretch words. I have a sister named Kim, and guys would call the house and they'd say, is Kim there? And my dad used to joke, he said, my sister, my daughters used to have a one-syllable name, but now it's 2 syllables. Kim. And so it was really helped me with playing with the phonetics. When Jesus says, I'm going to spend some time in the belly of the whale, he might have been saying, well, I'm going to spend time in the belly of the well. Well, the wells are the same as the 12 holes in space that Mary was thought to have guarded and to gone through. The whale is the same as the fish. And the ultimate fish that we're talking about, I believe, is Ea, the fish god. Here's a depiction here of Jesus, like Jonah or Olans, who is Ea. Because remember, Olans is simply the Babylonian name for Ea, and Jonah comes from Olans. Jesus is up top here, and he's about to go through this strange labyrinth that I think is some kind of a depiction of a wormhole. Olans, or Ea, initiates Jesus, and he puts on his coat, his hat, and his other garments. Here he is with his visor on in the flagellation. This is from an 11th century Bible called the Winchester Bible. And I wonder, what is this visor that he's wearing? Interesting kind of visor on. This comes from the Winchester Bible, which is an extraordinary piece of work we'll be mentioning again later. Also from the Winchester Bible, we have Jesus with some sort of a cross in his hand, a pillar, and he's opening up what they call the Leviathan. Leviathan is similar to the whale that we've been talking about. The whale is the fish, the wormhole. Leviathan literally means love tone. And so here we have Jesus with some kind of a pillar opening up what I interpret as the throat of a wormhole. And now here he is inside the eye symbol
inside that cosmic egg, actually traveling through the wormhole now. This, of course, is the Vesica Pisces symbol, which is simply the Egyptian symbol for the netter, or gods turned upright, which physicists in wormhole science call a Schwarzschild wormhole, has a similar throat. They're depicted in the exact same way. This is Jesus from Chartres Cathedral in France. He's in the Vesica Pisces again, which I'm interpreting as the throat of a wormhole. There he is opening the throat of that wormhole again. The pillar that he would be actually holding in his hand is the pillar of love, the cross, which is the Meru or Mero pillar, which my scientist friend says is a particle accelerator or a particle beam weapon. Maybe it's a lot more than that too. So during the 14th century, some interesting depictions of the crucifixion began to appear. They all had these strange flying vehicles, angels in the whirlwind, accompanied the crucifixion. Here's a close-up of that. When we see the face inside this whirlwind. This comes from Yugoslavia. We have, of course, Jesus on the pillar of the cross, flying vehicle here, another flying vehicle over there. What they're smoking, I don't know. But they definitely have a different take on what this event was all about. This is the opposite flying vehicle. Mandelbrot wormhole, another fractal. 14th century Germany, same thing. They all caught the same bug. Christ in the center, this kind of labyrinthine wormhole with a person emerging from it on the other side. I don't know how many other ways to interpret this than to say that there appears to be a movement among the early Kenobi, it seems to reclaim the technology of AI. This technology was geared towards opening up a wormhole, a hole in space, a Stargate, and the test pilot was Jesus. There's a wormhole depiction again with Jesus up on top, and we're winding all the way through, emerging from the other side. This is a classic transfiguration, or rather ascension depiction of Jesus. They always will show him in front of a bullseye. Why? My take on it again is this is representative of the hole in space. Wormhole science then becomes our forbidden fruit. This portrayal by William Blake, we have Eve eating of the wisdom or fruit of the serpent. That wisdom or fruit would, in my portrayal of this, would be the exotic matter of which the wormhole is composed. Exotic matter that physicists are on the trail of today. Teachings, exotic matter understood by Ea, half man, half serpent, who taught the secrets of the stars to the first man, the Napa. This is a classic transfiguration scene here. After the crucifixion, Jesus appeared, before the crucifixion, Jesus took several disciples up to the mountain, Mount Tabor, which is also called Meru, the center, and Elijah and Moses appeared. And Jesus' body was transfigured, turned into a cloak or a garment of light. And as a consequence of that experience, now opens up this, what I call a wormhole behind him. The disciples aren't quite sure what's going on. They come down from the mountain, and Jesus says, "Hey, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't mention what just happened." Yeah, no problem. And but all of the depictions of this transfiguration show the same thing, with Elijah, who was Olan's or John the Baptist, or Ea, accompanied with Moses, opening up this gateway or hole in space. Another classic transfiguration scene. These are scenes from the 15th and 16th century. Any Hollywood artist today would marvel at some of these and would readily adopt them for use in a movie about stargates or wormholes. Very technological. This is happens to be a portrayal by Hildegard de Bingen.
Yeah.
There's Jesus in the center with his radiant, or the rings or circles behind him. And again, my take is this is a journey into the inner world. I think it's a literal journey into the inner world. Through the wormhole. And just for the heck of it, we'll run through it again. Opening up the wormhole, the crucifixion, angel in the whirlwinds, accompanying it, the watchers, the holy ones, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki present at the crucifixion. Assisting, undoubtedly, in some form of fashion, what actually happened at that event. There's 5 criteria for wormhole construction according to modern physicists. The wormhole must stay open and not pinch off. There must be no strong tidal forces. There must be a two-way street, unlike a black hole which has an event horizon and only goes one way. One must be able to make the journey in a reasonably short period of time. In other words, you wouldn't want to enter a wormhole on Earth in the year 2002, go to the center of the galaxy only to return in the year 2300. Family and friends would be long gone and you'd be left in a disoriented state. So you have to be able to enter this, go into it, and come back in a short period of time. There must be a safe level of radiation in the wormhole to permit survival of the journey. And this is one of the key design features that physicists work on. They say, hey, we can do this now. If only the planet would commit all of its resources towards the construction of the wormhole, we could begin opening stargates and wormholes. But to me, that's the technical definition of peace, because once we begin opening up the wormholes and are actually able to go out into our own galaxy, the religions that exist on the planet right now they're going to evacuate. Surely we won't take them into space with us. We might, but likely what it's going to say is, we've grown up beyond our childhood. We are now ready to venture forth. Dr. Michio Kaku writes about this in his book Hyperspace, about how the present situation we're in right now is so fragile because this is the time when civilization either makes it or breaks it. If we make it, we then become a Stargate-faring civilization that's harnessed the power of our sun. We're able to share our resources. Today in our world, according to the UN, there's over 3.5 billion people on this planet that don't have access to a toilet and are 2.5 days walk from the nearest telephone. And here we are in modern-day Los Angeles, living something very close to a Stargate type of existence, where we're just this close, a hair's breadth away. We've understood the book of life, we can clone humans, we've got incredible technology, but yet there's this tremendous imbalance in our world. And that imbalance is either going to sink the ship if we don't do something about it, or it may suggest that it's just the perfect balance, that it has to be that way. But, from my take, I just don't see how you can call yourself an advanced civilization when half of you don't have a toilet and a telephone. So, what we're talking about here is finding a way to permit survival of the journey or through the Stargate or wormhole. And when you read the proposals for the design of these wormholes, they're almost always talking about some kind of a tube that they want to run through space that will protect the journey or through the wormhole. But what my research revealed is that you wouldn't do anything in terms of altering the wormhole itself. Rather, you would transform the person going through the wormhole. In other words, there was an intense mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, as well as a physical transformation that was undergone preparatory to this experience in the ancient world. And that's what the primary focus of my research is looking for examples of these Stargate or wormhole journeyers, and then find out, well, what happened at Mari's Temple Medical Facility? What was she teaching? How were they transforming the human being preparatory towards this experience? Very often you'll see Jesus holding a book of life, and in this particular instance, the center of the book has our concentric circles in it. And it suggests to me that the ultimate knowledge that he possessed that was given to Mary Magdalene concerned how to go through the stargates and wormholes. It was symbolized by, as we have noted, the skull. Mary's skull, again, is a symbol. And what does it actually symbolize? I believe it's a symbol for a skill, because the words skull and skill are phonetically interchangeable. So when Mary's holding a skull, she's not actually holding Jesus's or John the Baptist's cranium, as some people suggest. She is holding a skill, a sacred skill that these figures embody. Same thing with Osiris. I'll show you a depiction later of a pillar of Osiris that has this skull hanging. And you're asked to believe by Egyptologists that this is the skull or cranium of Osiris. I doubt it. I think it's symbolic of a skill, and the skill, again, are the 8 powers that we discussed earlier. And once you're able to embody these 8 powers, you're good to go. You're off and running. And it's interesting to me that one of them that I find most fascinating is the power to grow infinitely large or small at will.
Night falls in, and the song begins. Hear the violins play. Take my hand and be my man. Feel the real world melt away. Believe, dance with me. So gracefully you take the lead, and the soul of my dream awaits for you and me. Lost in time, our hearts beat in rhyme. It's our soul's true dance, it's destiny. Believe, dance with me.
In the religion of Paul, we have the story of a man who was trained at the Temple of Solomon. His father was a Pharisee. Jesus said the Pharisees had taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. And Paul presumably was aware of these keys of knowledge. And one day he's on his way to Damascus, which some people believe is actually the Essene compound at Qumran, when he's blinded by the light. And he attributes this light to Jesus. A couple of Jesus' assistants heal Paul, and he begins to preach a message about a figure of salvation. It's, if you simply believe in this figure, you will be saved and you will be granted eternal life. Well, what happens is that this dispenses then with all possible artifacts of this person. And of course, I show here the shroud, or possibly the cloak of the Illuminati, Jesus' cloak, or what is thought to be Jesus' cloak, very controversial artifact. Paul says, you don't need to know anything about the Holy Grail. You don't need to know anything about this cloak or this shroud. You don't need to know much of anything. All you have to do is believe. Well, that goes into stark contrast with the Gnostic interpretation. Gnosis is a Greek word that means knowledge. Just as few are aware that there's actually 2 forms of Christianity, most who research the shroud aren't even aware that there is actually a companion stone that accompanied the shroud or cloak of Turin. It was found in Edessa, and it too was alleged to have healing abilities or a healing quality about it. It's called the Kiramin, or Stone of Light, the stone of the Illuminati. And I believe that I found an interpretation of that stone. And here it is. Have you ever seen this face before? Where have you seen that face? You see that face on the Shroud of Turin. Shroud people say that this is the face of Jesus, and there is only one actual face that matches this. But yet, here in this depiction, we found a face that's virtually identical. In fact, I'm sure it's the same face. Interestingly, the face on the left, the one on the body of the serpent, was drawn in 1798 by a savant in Napoleon's army. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, he took over 500 savants and intellectuals with him, and they massively documented the Egyptian temples. At Alexandria, one of those savants drew an illustration or a picture of this bas-relief. Now, we all know that the first photograph of the Shroud of Turin was not made until 1898, a full 100 years after the waters with his mantle were dividing the waters. And down here in the lower left, we see Elijah ascending into heavens in his whirlwind from atop Mount Moriah. This cloak or pallium is also, I believe, depicted on the body of Osiris. It's shown in a very tight-fitting mesh-like form here. This, again, is of interest to us because researchers such as Chris Knight and Bob Lomas, who wrote the Hiram Key and the Second Messiah, claim that John the Baptist and Osiris are the same guy. So if that's the case, then what we're describing here is a cloak that originated perhaps with the Egyptian savior god Osiris in primordial Egyptian times and is passed along throughout the ages. In the early 4th century, the Coptic Christians, the Egyptian Christians, depicted Jesus wearing a similar tight-fitting garment. The angels on either side of him also wear some form of a tight-fitting garment. Jesus, of course, has the radiant halo around his head, indicating he's ascended to the realm of the Illuminati. This cloak, of course, is mentioned in the Bible, and when they came to the place which is called the skull, there they crucified him. And they cast lots to divide his garments. Here is an interesting depiction of the Roman soldiers gambling for the garment or cloak of the Illuminati of Jesus. The cloak also appears in another form. It's the golden fleece sought by Jason and the Argonauts. In early Christian terms, Jesus is often shown as a beardless man who's carrying a lamb, the symbol for wisdom, on his shoulders. In my book, The Healing Sun Cone, I talk about Jesus as a man, and Christos as a ketone frequency or vibration that is a carrier wave for sacred wisdom. And I believe that that's what these representations are pointing to as well. He's a man who has embodied this ketone frequency or vibration and is carrying this information in a cloak or on his body. The golden fleece of Jason or Jesus and the Argonauts was supposed to have been made of wool, the wool of the lamb. The word wool is the same as the word Suf, which is the origin of the word Sufi, the people of the path, the people of the Tarot, because Tarot means path. The path that the Sufis represent is the path to God, the winding stairway to heaven. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today because it's my contention that once we don the cloak of the Illuminati, we are prepared drawing on the left was made. What that suggests to me is that the person who originally sculpted this bas-relief must have seen the man and the woman who is represented in the bas-relief. In the Gnostic tradition, Jesus is depicted as a serpent, as a wise serpent of wisdom. And we're going to answer the question why he is depicted that way as we continue. Now, I like to joke that why would you show Jesus' face on the body of a serpent? What, did Jesus and Mary Magdalene go to Alexandria to a carnival and they stuck their head in some kind of a carnival drawing and someone drew or made this bas-relief? Is that what happened here? It's inexplicable. What I'm trying to present to you, and I can barely get arrested with this story among Shroud people, they do not want to confront the fact that there is a second depiction of the face of Jesus that predates the Shroud of Turin photo, and the reason I believe is because they can't get over the fact that it's on the body of a serpent. While we're on the subject of definitions, let's talk about the definition of the word cloak. When we think of cloak, we're thinking of an outer garment called a mantle. And we think of such stories as the Samaritan woman who touched the hem of Jesus' cloak or mantle and was healed. Now that's an extraordinary power that they're assigning to this cloak. In this incredible depiction, we see Johannes or John the Baptist wearing some form of a feathered garment, baptizing Jesus who stands in the River Jordan. An angel, indicated by the wings and the radiant halo around its head, is waiting with a cloak or a mantle. In my view, this is a depiction of the cloak of the Illuminati, because Jesus is being presented here as a newly born Christian initiate or an Illuminati. In 2 Kings, Elijah stood on the banks of the River Jordan and took his mantle, which was called the pallium, and wrapped it together and smote the waters, and they were divided. This is of interest to us because Elijah was believed to reincarnate in the time of Jesus as John the Baptist. If that's true, and I have the word of Jesus to suggest that it is true, it suggests to me that this cloak or mantle was passed along through successive generations or passed along among reincarnating beings. In other words, Elijah had it in approximately 800 BC. He turns up again at the time of Jesus as John the Baptist and passes this cloak or mantle to Jesus. And here we have a depiction at the top of Elijah smoting the...
Don't be afraid of the dark. You can light it with your heart. All it takes to ignite the flame is just desire and a little faith.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate your attendance here. I'm inviting you to an exploration today. I've been researching the material I'm going to present today over the course of about the past 20 years. And what this material represents to me is not necessarily a summation or even a conclusion. It's rather an invitation. It's to put it on the table for you to bring into your own awareness so that then we can perhaps start feeding back with one another. If you resonate with the material, what we're trying to do is today is drop a pebble in a pond and allow it to ripple outward. We're going to be talking about the Illuminati. And of course, when most people think of the Illuminati, they're thinking of a secret society that wants to run the world into the ground, including you and me, enslave the masses, form a cryptocracy, a rule by secrecy, where a few people at the top of the pyramid know all and are all, and everyone else in the bottom serves that as a sort of a slave or a serf. But actually, when you look into the history of the Illuminati, the term Illuminati actually means a newly baptized Christian initiate. And this brings up a whole other take on the matter. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there are actually two forms of Christianity. There's the religion about Jesus. This is the religion of Paul. Then there's the Gnostic, Druid, or Illuminati religion of Jesus. Both of them share essentially the same core story. The story of an illumined, an enlightened being that comes from elsewhere, comes to earth, befriends the little people, preaches a message of love, heals the sick, is persecuted by the political authorities of his time, dies at their hands, is reborn, and then ascends into the heavens in a vehicle of light with a promise to return. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the story of E.T. As my friend Jordan Maxwell will tell you later, Steven Spielberg is many things, but stupid is not one of them. And of course, we all know that his movies are loaded with information, tips, triggers that will help us to bring forward this information. I'll talk about a couple of those movies later, to walk or enter the stairway to heaven. Peeling the onion further on the word cloak, we find that the word cloak means to hide or to conceal. And this goes along with what I'm saying because much of the information I've described thus far has been occulted or cloaked from the masses. The masses of the Christians in this world are the Christians of the religion of, or rather about Jesus, that religion of Paul, with very little knowledge of the true religion of Jesus. And when I speak of the religion of Jesus, it was known to his family, or his family's response to Paul's creation of this religion was, hey, look, this is a mortal guy. He's our brother. He's our son. This is a person who spent many years of his life going throughout Egypt, through Samaria, through Iran, on into India, absorbing and assimilating the sacred teachings of the ancients, and he brought them together in a new religion of light. And perhaps the Shroud of Turin, if it is truly a relic of the crucifixion, represents the transformation of this person into a being of light and his ascension into heaven through that linen cloak. In geology, we find yet another interpretation of the word cloak or mantle. That's the covering of the bedrock of the earth. In anatomy, where I like to take everything, in other words, I feel that if we can't take a biblical story or myth and scripture from out here and put it inside our body, it's not going to do us much good. We find that the mantle is the cortex. It's the thin layer of the cerebrum. And of course, the Illuminati are almost always shown wearing some form of a cloak or a robe with the radiant halo. This depiction happens to come from Australia. It was discovered in 1836 and is of ancient pedigree. Jesus and his disciples were shown almost exactly the same way. So when John the Baptist initiates Jesus in the River Jordan and gives him the cloak of the Illuminati, he is given a garment or a mantle, a cloak. He's given something in the mantle of the soil. He's taught to secrete or secret something from the mantle or cortex of the brain. And this, or a combination of these things, produces illumination or enlightenment. Let's think about this in terms of the Samaritan woman. She walks up to Jesus, touches the hem of his cloak, and is healed. Well, let's say that instead of touching a robe, she actually touches the top of his radiant or glowing